Uhuru. My name is Coco Lewis. I am the International Secretary of the African National Women's Organization, AMWO. I'm your MC for tonight's political education. Tonight's broadcast of African Women Must Lead with Yejide Oromila is the second in a series of monthly live political educations from the African National Women's Organization. Tonight's topic is colonial capitalism, not patriarchy, as a cause of women's oppression. If you are registered for the program, you would have received your link in your email to an article as a reference doc entitled "AMWO Solves the Question of Patriarchy." In the article, Comrade Gejide and Akile offers an analysis on a struggle that a party member had with Black feminists, who, despite her own position as a colonized African person, attempts to make the case that Black men are privileged in this society. In today's discussion, President Gejide deepens this discussion and offer our viewing audience an opportunity to raise issues pertaining to this PE during the Q&A period. But please comment and engage throughout the program. African Women Must Lead is being multi-streamed live on the Burning Spear TV and AMWO on YouTube and AMWO's page on Facebook. Please take time to like, share, and follow on these platforms. AMWO is also on Instagram and Twitter for the folks who like to keep up with what we are doing between broadcasts. If you would like to know the exact dates of future streams, make sure you follow us and check out our website. Uhuru, welcome, President Gejide.
Uhuru comrades, thank you so much, Comrade Coco, for the introduction. I also just want to appreciate those of you who have tuned in for this very important discussion. So I'll get started, comrades. So this is there was an article that was shared via registration. There's a link to an article on the burningspear.com's page website to a piece that was written back in 2018. And one of our comrades was struggling with the Black feminist on social media around an issue. And, we thought that it was really important for us to write something around the article, around that struggle, but also offer some words of feedback and enlightenment or however we see, the question of patriarchy in today's society, and how it manifests as a result of, colonialism, because all things really seep from this colonial question, right? Like, so African people didn't just become slaves because that was an occupation that we desired. It was a process of, European process of taking lands and peoples from different places around the world and using the resources, which are the people themselves, to create wealth for this group of people who were the conquerors. And so because of that, they created policy, institutions, environments, society that was built around them and met their needs. So when we look at the way that patriarchy exhibits itself in the world today, we cannot exclude the real, like, the overarching social question of colonialism. Like, we didn't destroy colonialism, and it just still is here. We're just in a different phase of colonialism right now, right? So we are not hearkening back to some old-timey colonial soldier who is pointing his bayonet at you, but we're living in a time where all of the colonial issues still are present because African people have not achieved our power, and do not have access to our own resources to make decisions and act in our own best interests, despite the fact that many places around the world, African people do hold public office. That despite that, the real overarching question of colonialism is still evident, because we haven't had a revolutionary overthrow of the social system that will create an environment to really deal with the question of patriarchy, equality for African women or any other colonized women within the space of this social structure. So today's piece, I'm going to be going through this article and stopping from time to time to talk through, or deepen any other points of it. But, really it is to not just say that Black men aren't oppressed or don't have privilege underneath colonial. This is not a question. This is not even a discussion about Black men, but it's a discussion about patriarchy, which is one of the main pinpoints of what feminists um, really center in terms of, achieving, pinpoint in terms of like the thing that they have to destroy in order to achieve equality in this world. And as African people, as colonized women, we know that this is not a singular question of patriarchy, because there's, men in our communities don't hold power. Men in our world may have power over you in a certain kind of way, if that's allowable in your home or something that's being imposed on you. But for example, if they were to be out of your home, there's still an overarching systemic question of colonialism that still is evident and can still oppress you as an African woman. But we will talk through like what some of those internal colonial issues of oppression are, right? Like, because obviously they're very real. We brought up violence in some other PEs, because that's also a center point in why many women turn to feminism is the violence question, right? Like the domestic and internal violence that happens within the African colony, and how it's heightened not only in issues of domestic dispute between intimate partners, but overall the violence that we experience as colonized people are are high and experience in direction to one another, like we inflicted on one another, is high because we're colonized, and we could talk about that as well. So, as Coco said earlier, this is a discussion. I know it don't seem like it because I'm gonna be talking at you, but like, use the comments freely, and our comrades will be, starring the comments that we're gonna comments and or questions that we'll highlight during the question and answer portion of today's program. So the article in question is on theburningspear.com, and the title of it is "The African National Women's Organization Solves the Question of Patriarchy." And this was a collaborative article, because it was really, Director Akile, director of the Agitation and Propaganda Department of the African People's Socialist Party, was someone who contributed to this article. I contributed to this article, and also the comrade who was engaged in the direct struggle with the sister was also included in this article. So there's a lot of voices here. I really appreciate also the picture that's on this, and I'm I didn't prepare to show you the picture, but it really is just like colonialism is like a scale. Colonialism is like showing Uncle Sam, police, jails, bombs, war on one hand, and then patriarchy, which is just singular man or representation of men on the other scale. And obviously, the colonialism is outweighing the question of men as a So the African National Women's Organization wants to. I'm starting the article now, in case you get figure it out. The African National Women's Organization wants to talk and write about feminism and patriarchy about as much as feminists want us to talk and write about it, which is zero. We would rather spend all of our time engaged in solving the problems of our class, organizing African women to combat colonialism, which threatens our participation in the African liberation struggle, but also just threatens our participation as free people, like, struggling to be free people. It threatens our participation in all aspects of our life right now. We are forced to, however, make critiques of the subjective, petty bourgeois nature of feminism because we found it to be divisive, unproductive political line that leads African women away from African liberation and towards an unrealistic stance of self preservation under white power imperialism. I believe I did a previous political education that talked about like African internationalism versus feminism and where our stance is. So, definitely go back to that one. It's on the Burning Spear TV, on our Facebook, on ANWO's Facebook, and on our ANWO YouTube as well. But we talk about like the differences in how we see ourselves. And really, one of the main differences between African internationalism and feminism is a class one. It's a class analysis, which is that feminism really aligns allows the petty bourgeoisie to use it as a vehicle to make inroads into the current status quo system. It doesn't really by itself shake up anything. It is about making advances, gaining equality to men within this system, and to get a seat at the table so that they can also make policy and do whatever it is that they want to do at the very base of it, right? Like it's that feminist question really speaks to that when you're talking about the overarching thing. Why is there a feminist movement? And then African internationalism is um, is a working class analysis, right? Like it looks at the whole question, not just the fact that patriarchy exists and that it is something that should be done away with, which we do believe. We also understand that the colonial question for us is primary. Like, it's like, okay, I can be equal to a man. I could do as much as a man can do. And in many cases, we do much more and the same as a man. I'm not talking about physically, but sometimes we are more physical, right? But I'm talking about we can, even par, we can do that. Let's say we were equal to a man. We still have the system in and of itself that we have to deal with. We ain't free. We just equal now to African men underneath the system of oppression that has still oppressing all African people. So when we, as an African internationalist perspective, that's our viewpoint. That yes, there are things that we have to deal with within the African colony. We should deal with and are dealing with right now through struggle, but we don't find that those are antagonistic to in the way that the struggle that has to be made to like get free. Like that's the ultimate struggle. Like to get free freedom for African people means to get freedom for African women. And if African women are not a part of that struggle to participate in the overarching African freedom struggle, then the things that we have to destroy in the process of making the revolution, like the patriarchal misogyny, all the things that happened to African women under colonialism, um, are not going to be really addressed in the free time. So that's why we're like engaged in this discussion right now. So I'll continue. AMWO is a confusing organization for many feminists and feminist leaning activists because while we are in favor of equality of African women on one hand, we are against colonialism in all of its forms, including in the form of petty bourgeois feminism, which puts forth the position that patriarchy is primary barrier for African women. Patriarchy, as problematic as it may be, is not the core contradiction. It can be overturned with political education in the form of discussions and from time to time, if necessary, physical resistance, because we do know that, violence is a thing and people don't usually stop being violent because you ask them to. So, there may be necessary times where African women have to defend ourselves physically against that violence. And then colonialism, on the other hand, cannot be reasoned with. Its very existence is at the expense of the lives and lands of many of the world's peoples, regardless of age, gender, political alignment, class, or religion. Colonialism don't care. There's a commercial that talks about shingles, and then we like, and these like women, these people be like, I work out. And it's like shingles don't care. And like colonialism don't care. Like they don't care how great you are, how eager you are, or whatever. Colonialism just don't care. And colonialism is not this thing on its own. It's carried out by white power imperialism. It's carried out by the systems, the people that they put in place, governments, armies, all of these things are carrying out a system of colonialism. So it's systemic, and so colonialism just don't care. It's about fulfilling the needs of the ruling class and African people all aspects of um, in all places in the world. I can say that confidently are not the ruling class, despite many of them being in power, many of them being having millions, billions of dollars, are not the ones in power. Because at any given time, that can be taken away from us. So we understand that colonialism is the thing that has to be destroyed in order to really break open this vision of freedom that we hope to experience in our lifetime, where African people can produce for our own selves, with our labor, our works, all of these things are really important for us to make and produce for our produce life and for our own benefit. So therefore, we can own the means of production and take the resources that can create a society that everybody has housing and that we have all the necessities that we need: food, clothing, housing, and shelter, and and have leisure time to do other things like explore arts and create all the things that would you know indicate a successful and thriving society. And right now, most of us in the world are really on in line with like being just surviving in the world. So these are so when we look at the question of you know whether or not somebody's in a house with a man and he can they can't, then they're supposed to cook while the man sits down. Like that's a struggle that can be dealt with, right? But like the fact that the man has to go out or the woman has to go out and both of them have to go out and work in the mines or create and pull up raw materials for such and such division, some corporate conglomerate that's rooted in France or United States or somewhere else, that can't be reasoned with or resolved as easily as say asking your husband to participate in the in in household duties. So I'll move forward. So therefore, Amwell understands that patriarchy is undesirable. As we continue to critique feminist conclusions that prioritize ending patriarchy over all things, because we understand that an equal society cannot be achieved under parasitic exploitative system of capitalist colonialism. Only the African Revolution can bring about an equal society. So what we do instead is build toward a revolution. In that process of building a new socialist society where African workers have control of the state, we are challenged and transformed through criticism and self-criticism, dialectical materialism, combating liberalism, engaging in struggle, and forwarding the leadership of African women as a practice. So I just want to, this part is really important. It's like how are you going to change minds and hearts and stuff just by, navigating through society? The reality is that unless you have a really good relationship with certain folks, then you really don't change those things all by yourself as an individual. It requires organization, it requires discipline, it requires something that holds you accountable to it. And not like everybody's going to join the African National Women's Organization or even the African People's Socialist Party. We hope that you do, right? But in these revolutionary organizations, you learn how to be a revolutionary and you learn what kind of society that you want to live in. And in these groups, in these meetings, in whatever way that we interact with one another, we learn, you know, how it is to struggle with somebody and make critiques and make criticism. And if anything is happening subjectively that would, subjectively meaning, in your home, not in party life, not in animal life, um, that can be brought to the organization to discuss and deal with. And so, but it requires like an understanding, a deeper theory, and understanding, a plan, a vision for our future. Now, if you're not envisioning a future where African people can be free and we can thrive and all these things, and you not working toward that every day through your practice, then it's pretty hard to like, you know, ex, you know, subs, um, submit to like some criticism and self-criticism and understanding dialectical materialism and combating liberalism, all the things that we have to do in life just to shed colonialism, like shirk it off of our back. So these are things that um, can happen as an individual, but it can happen more successfully if you're part of organizations. So, I would encourage that anybody who is looking to really deal with this issue in life is to join our organization, because I feel like we the best that ever done it. You know what I mean? And I'm biased on that point. So I'll continue. Alternatively, feminism encourages equality in order to maintain the status quo within the existing parasitic social structure. I already talked about that. For example, it has African women fighting for equal pay for women, while oppressor nation women continue to earn more than African, Indigenous, Latinx men and women in the US. I make this point because We often say that there's no such thing as women in general, um, because the fight for feminism in many cases tries to equalize the struggle of women as one struggle against the men who uphold society in a certain kind of way, right? And so, but it doesn't really talk about you know the question of women in terms of colonizer women and colonized women. So while, yeah, we want to get equal pay, but equal pay to who? And equal pay to white men, that means that white men still are making more money and we're equaling ourselves to them. And white women still earn more than the rest of us. So so this equal pay, um, let's just say women as a whole make more money, then there's still a whole sector of our population, right? It's not making enough resources. But who sets the terms for the resources and what people are paid is oppressive, exploitative system, industry, capitalism that creates that names what your labor means to you, or it says what your labor is worth, um, and not really pay you what you are worth. So in this system, this question around equal pay and being equal to men, is really flawed, underneath capitalism. You just can't really get equality that way. So it all comes back like to colonialism. Like you got to destroy it. So this is going to be a repetitive theme in this discussion. So essentially, colonized, oppressed people within the U.S. colony are fighting just to catch up to white women, while white women are fighting to be equal to white men. And one about previous PEs, we talked about the history of like development of feminism as it is today, and really identifying, the ways in which white women, in terms of like making sure that they get what they get, and once they get it, it's like, okay, deuces, y'all. Like, I'll use your story, I'll use your experience to kind of tag on to mine as a white woman to kind of make white women seem like they have all these things. But the reality is colonized women who are experiencing all the things in the world, that need to be dealt away with in terms of oppressive, gender constructs and things like that. Um, and if you just get behind these colonized women who are fighting for freedom, not just for themselves but for their people, then the world will be better. But that's not it. White women are always leading on these gaps, right? Like on all these initiatives to get equality to certain kind of people or to men. And that's been historically, that's just been charted. If you just look at every single decade and women's struggles, and when white women are achieving progress, they use the issues of colonized women to bolster their call for women to go to action, right? So, we really have to look at that question of like, you know, um, like all women are not the same, and we should definitely recognize and break down the whole colonial question, the ruling class question, and the petty bourgeois question. So patriarchy, I'm continuing. Patriarchy does not explain the overrepresentation of the African prisoners in the U.S., Europe, and Canada, state violence, the overrepresentation of African children kidnapped by the state, dumpster babies, neocolonialism, infant and maternal health death, poor health care, food deserts, gentrification, ethnic cleansing, and proxy wars. So the way that patriarchy is positioned as the primary thing, it would make it seem like men are the ones who are creating all these ills in the world. And like, I have a problem with that. Like, you know, I know some really scruffy ass women. Like, I really know some women who don't care and who are a part of the ruling class, who are meeting the same objectives as the other people in the ruling class. And just like I said, colonialism don't care. And so patriarchy cannot explain the question of men having power. It doesn't really um help us understand like all these other sorts of things that are happening in society. So if men, for example, had this uncharted allegiance because they're men, why is there so many men in prison, right? Like, so why is there so many African men in prison in the U.S. and vice versa? There's so many other examples of why patriarchy is not the end all be all thing that we can measure, you know, oppression versus freedom. We can't do it. So I'm continuing. Feminists are confused about privilege, patriarchy, and oppression. The fact that feminists cannot explain the world confuses even feminists themselves. Feminism does not provide an analysis for oppression, colonialism, or violence, even though violence seems to be the primary basis for the creation of, for example, a Black feminist. So I'm going to go into the struggle right now. Like a self identified feminist engaged in a struggle with our party member after he made a critique of Angela Davis on a social media post. What resulted was a stream of straw man arguments used by feminists to defend their position that African men benefit from white power. The feminists tried to make a point about oppression, which lobbed all forms of internal colonized oppression on African men. I want to say that the feminist is a self-identified feminist, so it's not like I know that there are different kinds of feminism. I know that there are womanism, there's radical feminism, radical Black feminism. There's all these other kind of feminism, but in my experience, and in other Conrad's experience, and probably in your experience, what we often find with feminism or feminists is that it's really hard to really talk about other things outside of, unless they've identified with some other aspect of the struggle, but they're not just solely a feminist. But it's really hard to kind of have a conversation with them outside of that talks about something that gives an explanation around violence, around some of the things that feminism really pinpoints. It's really hard to have a discussion with them that's productive. Um, as a self-identified feminist, I'm continuing, initiated a struggle with the Patriarchy. The feminists tried to point out oppression, which lobbed all forms of internalized colonized oppression on African men. When the party member presented her with the variations of violence that happens among the colonized, giving the example of cishet African women oppressing queer African women. The feminist says, "We do, but in a power structure, it doesn't do anything like a Black person being racist to a white person." So I just want to clarify this: is that the comrade was trying to make a this give an example. A cishet is somebody who is um, biologically their gender and agrees with that gender. So if I'm born a woman, I agree that I am a woman and identify as a woman. So that's a cishet person. And oppressing a queer African woman. So, like when you're talking about oppression within society, and he was making that case that he made an example about there's other women that oppress other women too, and particularly if they're in an intimate relationship. And the feminist says that within a power structure like ours, that doesn't do anything, despite the fact that, because they're a woman, that they can't really experience oppression or oppress anybody else because they themselves are oppressed, right? This is the argument. To which the party member said, but if they're oppressing, doesn't do anything, then they are not really oppressing. So Black women are incapable of oppressing, but black men are able to oppress Black women. That's the question. So, that's the same kind of, you know, argument that, she just gave, but now she's saying that Black men do oppress and within a system where Black men have no power. So I'll continue. The reality is that oppressive violence in a system of colonialism is a symptom of colonial. I'm so sorry, y'all. The reality is that oppressive violence is a symptom of colonialism. Colonized people engage in violence at much higher rates than if we were not colonized because of the force contained conditions that are in place to control us. There is a Fuji song, um, and before like on it's not it's Fuji La. It's that Fuji's album, and there was a song on the album where there is a skit that happens before the song, and it's like, um, and the skit basically has somebody angrily speaking. He's like, you know, I'm gonna oppress you because it was talking about oppression between African people, and it was like, I can't oppress the phone company, I can't oppress the water bill, I want to oppress the people who turned off my lights. So it was this question of like oppressing, and within um, that system, and so where we talk about, and I'm saying that, mentioning that because the whole question of violence and oppression within the colony and the high rates of violence, we see it across the board. Yes, the numbers of African women who are harmed, killed because of domestic violence is high, but also the rate at which African people are dying is high. The rates at which African people are killing one another is high. Overall, when we look at the broader question of violence within the African nation, um, the question of violence is high. And when you centralize the gender question because you are a woman and you want to pull that out, and because we care, we don't want African women to be harmed. We also, but if you prioritize that and name it patriarchy, then it's difficult for you to then look at the scope of the world. For example, there are African mothers who are oppressing their children, and for some of us who believe that you can oppress children, because I do, um, violent, angry, and they're angry because of the social conditions that they have grown up with and experience, and that's just the way that they show anger, and violence is toward one another. They may have been somebody who have been oppressed by their parents, and therefore that's the only way they know how to discipline a child is to do the same exact thing, and so on and so on and so forth. And so within the confines of colonialism that has been oppressing African people for so long, we don't even know what it means to be free. We don't have no idea. I mean, we might have a concept of what it looks like to be free, but some of us already think that we're free because we are able to have a house, we're able to have cars, we're able to work and move freely throughout the world. So we think that, okay, everything's cool. But when we are looking at oppression and who oppresses who within the society, like the question always comes back between this men women dichotomy, when the reality is that in our communities, violence is high across the board, mother to child, parent to parent, people to people, like husband to wife, wife to husband. Like the violence in our community is high. So um, I'm continuing. This is how we explain, and I'm this is how we explain the African mother who kills her children, or the African trans man who beats his girlfriend, or the African teenage girl who stabs and kills her classmate. Colonial conditions breed violence. Colonialism is not the creation of African men, it is the creation of white power, imperialism to maintain control of the colonized. Um, you know, we have to look at the onset of colonialism in our world, right? You're in your own house. Let's give an example. You're in your own house, minding your own business, and then somebody don't even knock on your door. They kind of kick in the door and be like, "I'm here now. From now on, you're gonna, in order for you to walk out the house, you have to lick peanut butter off of a carrot." And you like, "I'm not gonna lick no peanut butter off no carrot." And you like, "You're gonna lick this peanut butter off the carrot. I'm gonna punch you in your face," and you get punched in the face a couple times. And this is, over and over. You learn to lick the peanut butter off the carrot to exit the house and do other things. And then when you come back home, you might have to lick, you know, jelly off of a tomato or something like that. So this is how colonialism enters the world as an oppressive, dominating thing, and it changes behaviors, societies, and the way that we interact with one another. We can't be foolish enough to think that at some point we kind of like all the things that we learned over hundreds and hundreds of years of this oppression that we've experienced somehow just went away, and we don't have any of those internal issues that was created by it. We live in a society that was cultivated off of the oppression and stealing of other people's stuff, and the killing and maiming and any effort of liberation and freedom, and particularly by African people and other people who are trying to get free. So we are living in a society that says that your freedom, my freedom, is not something that's desired, and has shown us time and time again that at any point that can, people and places can be wiped out. So when we look at like the colonial conditions that created violence. It wasn't African men or any other colonized man that created this violence or the conditions around which they are angry and are violent. It is the system itself that was created that created these conditions, right? So African men, therefore, cannot benefit from white power when they are the victims of it. Um, the feminists could not contend with us with this line of questioning and attempted to retreat from the discussion when the comrades deepened the question of African male privilege and oppression. So confused about privilege, patriarchy, and oppression, there's no such thing as African male privilege. That's our point. That's the position. African men may be doing it good. They may have, certain advances and stuff like that, but there's no such thing in society. I think, many of us can feel this, like in our household, that like women run shit. You know what I'm saying? Women run things, right? For the most part, even if there is like this oppressive male character that may be around, like women still are the ones who are the movers and the shakers and the power makers in many cases, despite the fact that there might be somebody who are oppressive. But even if there wasn't, even if African women were oppressed by African men wholly and solely, that African male privilege still couldn't exist within a system that does not give privilege to any African person. So here's some questions that are posed, right? Does male privilege then save us from getting gunned down by the pigs? Does male privilege work when white women yell rape and the next thing you know, there's a lynch mob at the door? Did African men get whipped less and African women more on a plantation? Did African men get to be in the house while African women were outside? Does male privilege keep African men from being stuffed into prisons? Perhaps it was male privilege that crushed the Black Revolution of the 60s, too, right? Hmm. Right? Like, did we crush our own revolution? Or was it the cops that kicked in doors, killed people, chopped heads, dismembered bodies, put you in barrels of acid? And I'm talking about not just the United States, but like the whole scope of what the African people are fighting for their freedom all over the world, particularly in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And the amount of violence that was um, doled out against African people. Look now, like the African People Socialist Party are dealing with the FBI attack on our movement and the U.S. State Department attack on our movement. And for the most part, we've been talking about freedom and liberation of African people. We've made our position clear around many international issues. And these are the things that the United States government wants to criminalize. Now, this is just talking. There are people who are actually doing things, African people who had done things in the past to kind of forward the question of African freedom. So it wasn't African men who came in and undid all of those things. It was a system that did not want that sort of freedom and liberation to actually be realized, that was doing all the violence. So the comrade continues, where is my so-called male privilege to grant me power over judges, the police, the courts, the schools, the banks? How does one begin to organize to defeat male privilege, since this seems to be a fundamental issue? Colonialism, imperialism, and parasitic capitalism be damned. It's male privilege that snatches African women's children away and places them in foster care. It's male privilege that has distorted the relationships between African men and women and not centuries of oppression. How do you define how you, a Black woman, ended up in this country? Do you say that male privilege did that? And so, what the comrade is asking, obviously, are rhetorical questions, but she can answer them, right? Like, and you can answer these questions as well as we're going through this program. Like, all of these are examples of like how there is no male privilege, no African male privilege anyway, right? Like how the conditions of African people is not solely based on this gender thing where men have power over women, but is on a systemic thing. System. Colonialism, don't care. We're gonna keep talking about colonialism, don't care, right? And the question of how did I, as an African woman, come into this country? Well, how did we as African people get here, right? Or anywhere for that matter, all over the world. Yes, I know that there is the factual examples of that people have come to understand through a book called They Came Before Columbus, where African people have been traveling the globe way before Europeans could get a ship and go anywhere. So yeah, African people were doing these things, but for the result, the movement of millions of African people throughout the world, um, for the purposes of accumulating wealth for the imperialist colony, I mean metropole, is the process by which most African people ended up anywhere. Even today, even the ones who migrate or immigrate here, um, are here because of, as a result of the same colonial question that divided the African nation and spread us all over the place, because Africa is being attacked. African people are being attacked. There is like, if Africa was like, if it had all the things, like we would be going there. Like there would be no rush to leave Africa. Even though Africa does have all the things. It has all the things that everybody in the world wants, that everybody in the world is getting, except for African people. And so that's why they're going. But African people are leaving. African people are leaving the Caribbean, right? Even though they were sent there centuries ago, African people are leaving the places in which, they are the majority, to go to places where they're not the majority, to kind of get a better way of life, because that's where all the resources are going. So when you ask the question, when he asked the question, how did you get into this country? We didn't come here because an African man was like, you go to America. It was through a process of stealing, kidnapping, violence that brought us here. And that is a colonial question. That's not a patriarchal question. That's a question that is a fact of colonialism. I'll continue. It did nothing for us when colonialism did nothing for us. I'm sorry, patriarchy. It did nothing for us when it dispersed us around the world. It does nothing for us today with the present conditions of genocide. So privilege did nothing for us when they dispersed us around the world. It did nothing for us today with the present conditions of genocide. To think that African women can achieve liberation separate of African men, you really have to ask the question, how would that happen? Yeah. That's a question for you all. Like, you're listening to me talk and you're like, if you can't answer the question, or if you have another alternative view, say it. You know what I mean? But if you can answer the question, how will African women gain freedom despite the fact that our African nation is not free? So even if you were to gain advances, and I don't even know what those advances would be at this point, outside of this whole question of like trying to ascend to the levels of petty bourgeoisdom, where say Oprah sits or Michelle Obama sits, or some other kind of African woman that we celebrate. Oh, I can't wait to do this PE around the petty bourgeoisie. Oh, I can't wait. But I won't go into it now. We talk about characters like that and how that really does nothing to forward the goals and objectives of African working class women. But like African but yeah, just really looking at how can African women um ascend to or transcend their oppression, um solely outside of the question of African freedom. And I can't realize that. And if you can realize that, like, I would love to see what your responses would be to that, you know. So moving forward, African men do and say horrible things to African women, and vice versa, not as a result of male privilege, but because of the relationship we have with colonialism. When we identify our issue as male privilege, we place the onus on the oppressor versus the oppressor, and doesn't give us an opportunity to overturn it, right? So now the thing that oppresses me is this person that's in front of me, as opposed to the system itself. And many of us who are being oppressed within those very tight relationships can't see. I don't know what the saying is. You can't see the window before the fog or something like that. But you can't see the over. You don't even care about what's happening elsewhere. Like, your freedom is through the door, and this person is staying in front of the door and won't let you out. It's the guy with the peanut butter and the carrot, right? And you can't get out that door unless you can't get to the door of freedom. And anything beyond the scope of this house, this issue with this person that's blocking the door, anything out there is free, even though it's not, right? So we get to we in this struggle to like deal with the very real experiences of people who are being abused, which I mean, we talk about like human trafficking. People talk about human trafficking, sex trafficking, all the things that are happening to primarily women, and mostly colonized women, right? uh, and children all over the world. And it's like, how are we going to stop sex trafficking? We cannot stop sex trafficking when the foundation of sex trafficking, the system that founded sex trafficking, human trafficking, all of the trafficking is still in place. Like, there's no way you can stop the networks of people who are being shuffled around the whole entire world when the world encourages the shuffling of people throughout the world for the profit of somebody else, right? Like, so how did I get there? So like when we look at the ways in which we understand oppression and privilege and patriarchy, like, we have to look at all of beyond the person that's standing in front of the door and the world around you. We can solve the problem about the person standing in front of the door in a number of beautiful ways. Like, we can try to reason with this person, and reasoning can be verbal, reasoning can be some other kind of way. But you cannot, um, you can't, oh, the forest before the trees. You cannot you can't say that that's the end point. It really isn't, because just like as we know happens, is a woman who might be abused in one relationship, she gets free of this person, and then there's somebody else right around the corner that starts abusing her as soon as she gets up through the door. And the system itself doesn't stop, and we have to be able to really articulate and practice ways in which we are stopping the system itself as we are dealing with the guy in front of the door. Moving forward, the feminists responded, "You see, that's what black men do. You always make it about you. That's what I'm talking about." The sister does not have a historical materialist understanding of the world and the place of Africans in it, such as what is explained in the theory of African internationalism. Therefore, she has come to the wrong conclusions about the whole question of patriarchy and privilege, which we've already explained. We have to deal with the idea we can have ideological disagreements with sisters who have this understanding, and we do. But at the end of the day, we want every African woman to be educated about the root causes of our conditions and how to fight. We recognize barriers that are sometimes present in our communities and unite that they should be destroyed. We do not want to fight African men and discourage them from acting as a state in our homes. Um, oh, no, we do not want to fight African men, and we do discourage them from acting as a state in our home. We do not want African men who are oppressed out in the world to then come into the house and act like as the oppressor, become the colonial state in a sense in the house of people of where we share life. And we don't want that to be the case. Neither do we want any other African person to really express the nature of the state in our homes, mothers to children. And I keep saying that question of mothers to children because a lot of us have grown up. I know a lot of us has grown up where there's parents who the only way they know how to discipline is through violence. And I am one of the people who believe that you can discipline without violence, and I have disciplined without violence. And so when I look at the ways in which people sometimes celebrate, my mama hit me with a switch, and girl, I'm okay. Like, that's also oppression. Like, that's fear that we cause in our people, these little humans who then grow up to become people. So I keep saying that women to children, or parents to children, women to men, men to women, because these levels, these different kinds of oppressions that happen in the colony are really mimicking the overall oppression, the state oppression that happens to us in the world. Um, okay, we do not want to fight African men and discourage them from acting as a state in our homes, communities, or any other space. And we support dialogue and action that dismantle colonial behaviors that mimic the oppression of white power. That's why we are actively involved in dismantling these behaviors, like what we've done in Santa Barbara, California, and we organize our community to respond to a campus predator. We have also targeted, and I'll talk about like so. So there was we were on campus at USC, University of California, Santa Barbara campus, and we had some organizers who were on campus who were experiencing this one brother who seemed to be, a predator. And we didn't go attacking him. We didn't. Well, we kind of did open up the discussion for the community, the campus, the African community on campus, to what this brother has done, and without naming who he was, and just trying to like open up a dialogue. And we were able to investigate that. But there was some problems with that too, because African women on campus who identify as victims of this person didn't feel safe going to the police, right? And they didn't feel like the community themselves were supportive of them talking about this guy that everybody liked. You know what I mean? So like there are these situations within our community that it's not the responsibility of African women to also solve. Like it's the responsibility of the community to solve, because we want everybody to be safe. So that means that everybody got to be involved in making African women safe, including our, but primarily ourselves too. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in our new campaign that's coming out. Um, so we have also targeted our work at the primary purveyors of violence in our community, the state. We have organized protests against slumlords that threaten eviction and social service offices that deny services in one. We've organized a community response to the state sponsored kidnapping of African children from poor working class African families with our campaign Arrest CPS. And we are also organizing a community response to child welfare called the Uhuru Kijiji Child Care Collective that makes the community responsible for African women, children, and families overall. Um, and we are also engaged in building economic self sustainability for our organization and our community through our brand, decolonize and provide political education through our website, flyers, and the Burning Spear newspaper column, Harriet's Daughters. Our work addresses the real material conditions of our people. So even as we debate about patriarchy, we are actively involved in overturning real colonial conditions about our feelings about patriarchy. And in addition to all of those, AMWO is constantly is constantly trying to expand and look at other ways in which African women experience colonialism, and the impact of that, and things that we can do as an organization and with other African women around the world to intervene and solve some of those problems. But many of our campaigns are not African women sole things that, yeah, we lead them, but like the community is involved in solving the questions of whatever it is that we have opened up as one of our campaigns. So like that's the end of the article, but I mean, I hope it's clear. I hope that it's clear that colonialism don't care. Colonialism is a center part of it. African men, as well as any other colonized man, does not have privilege in a society that doesn't give privilege to any African person. I mean, it's just evident all across the board. And that when we as people look at dynamics of power within the colony and outside of the colony, I think it's really hard to see outside of the colony because of so many contradictions, right? Like, so when we are organizing in the streets of Southeast DC and a little baby just got shot and killed because, some Africans, we think, because they never catch the killers, right? Um, Drove by a party and shot up the place and the little baby got murdered, right? It's hard for our community then to say, but it's the state, maybe like we gotta stop the violence in our community, which we should, right? Like we should aim our guns not at ourselves but at the people who are the oppressors of society. And but those sort of situations make it really hard for um, African people to kind of see the forest because of the trees, right? Like the trees, they can't see the whole thing because they only see in this tree. And so the same thing with violence against women, you can't see the forest because this thing that the numbers at which African women are harmed by an intimate partner are high, and that African people not only just harm but like uphold some of these patriarchal, colonially imposed patriarchal um, systems is really hard too. We can't really see that. People were just like, so some of the responses that we've gotten to this and other issues around patriarchy is that that, prior to colonialism, there was patriarchy. And yes, we know. Um, but the way in which it represents itself today is because of colonialism. Like, it's expanded, it's become policy in many instances, that the way that the family is structured has not been allowed to evolve because of the imposition of colonialism in many places, in particular, where men go to work and women stay home. So, for example, like, you know, places in some places in Africa, or other places in other places, right? Like, where there's a agrarian sort of society, women are the producers of food, the preparers of food, and these are the things that help that society grow. The men are the hunters, the providers of meat, things like that. So these are the ways in which the society which were just based on the needs of that society. But because of policy, the way that Europe perceived women and men and relationships and property and ownership, when they colonized the world, these very same things were now exhibited and made into edict in many places. Like, if it wasn't like a policy that men get to get a birth certificate and not women, then it was at least then ushered into that society that men were able to do more things than women, because women were not seen as anything. And um and so that reinforced this whole idea about women being in the kitchen as opposed to men going out and go capturing an animal and bringing it home. And people hold on to these things, but the reality is that if society evolves, and because we have been colonized for so long, we have not been able to evolve past this idea of this nuclear family, this way of life and living that is outdated at best, and that the world in which we are living is you know that is really a fog. And once we bust the the colonial fog maker, we're able to see a clear picture of the world from there. And I hope that was helpful, and I'm really looking forward to and uh, any discussion and conversation around this issue. And yeah, so I'm just gonna go back to my comrade, who's gonna make some announcements, and then we'll get into the question and answer period. Uhuru, you're on mute, comrade.
All right. Uhuru President yesterday. That was a very dynamic breakdown. So everyone, we're on our way to the QA section. So please prepare your questions. I see that a lot of comments and questions came in. And for any further questions, please remember to share your name and location and then your question. And before we go into the Q&A, let's go ahead and go into some announcements here. If I can bring it up, there we go. All right. So announcements are up, and I'll be filling in the chat too as well. First, African women from around the world to join the African National Women's Organization. If you found this discussion to be, informative, or you want to know more, um, we are the only anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolutionary organization for Black women, period. We have members in Africa, Europe, and the United States, of course. Join the international collective of women building that revolutionary capacity for building the revolutionary capacity of African women. To learn more about membership and to join us, visit anwolohuru.org/join. Also support AMWO as AMWO's economic development project, Decolonize Hair and Body. Decolonize Hair and Body are natural personal care products that highlight the natural ingredients and traditional care practices used by indigenous people around the world, in addition to featuring images and quotes of revolutionaries. Get yours today at decolonize.com. Hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa. Support the Uhuru 3 and our fight against the U.S. indictments. defend the African freedom struggle, defend African liberation struggle, defend the Uhuru movement. Visit handsoffuhuru.org for more and to donate to the Legal Defense Fund. Also, we volunteer with us. We are always looking for producers and interpreters, chat moderators, and advocates. If this is something you're interested in, email us at info@amwouhuru.org if you'd like to share your skills or learn new skills. So the AMWO's campaign, Arrest CPS, is our campaign that has the goal to help expose the parasitic nature of the foster care system and the devastating role it plays in the lives of Black families. We want to see children return to their homes and resources allocated by the state to go directly to the families, ensuring successful reunification. Any less than this is an act of genocide. During our National Day of Action, we stand shoulder to shoulder with Black families who are trapped in this system, fighting to regain custody of the children from the state. On August 26th, in the cities across the organizers and parents demanded to the state-sponsored kidnapping of Black children and organized people in support or going through this trauma. We are building movement for strength and unity. We are also raising up the Hands Off Uhuru anti-colonial movement. Not only is it it's been 1 year since the FBI attacks on the Uhuru movement Not only is it 1 year since the FBI attack, the Uhuru movement for being critical of the U.S. policy as organizers, we have also been targeted by local governments as we attempt to defend families through our public protests. We are building strong networks of empowered families and advocates to fight back. So join one of our events on August 25th through September 2nd in one of the following cities. We're in St. Louis, Missouri, Washington, D.C., San Diego, California, Los Angeles, in the area of Monterey, California, Boston, Massachusetts, Newark, New Jersey, Durham, North Carolina, Portland, Oregon. So please say you're coming by registering or contacting organizers now you can use the link on the QR code on the screen, or you can visit tinyurl.com/AMWONDA2023. If you are interested in creating an event or action, let us know by sending us an email at arrestcps@amwouhuru.org. We invite you to join us, our organizers, planning meeting on Monday, August 21st from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then lastly, we have AMWO's Harriet's Daughter Study Group and Book Club. We are restarting this program because I feel like political education is needed right now. So, one of the ways we do that is using books to break down. You don't have to read the book to join us, but I do encourage you to join us. And our first book is part 1 of the book Homegoing by Ya Inyasi. You can register at amwouhuru.org under /events and click Harriet's Daughter Book Club. And that's going to be that's going to be the day after the Day of Action. It's going to be August 27-23 from the hours of 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and times for the other time zones. So that's the end of our announcements. Let's bring the President yesterday back up. And we have a lot of comments. This was a lively comment section on both Facebook and YouTube, which is I love cooperation, collaborating. you know, I love people commenting and to get these different viewpoints here.
I see them.
So
I see them. I see
yeah,
them coming up, and I actually pinned a few. And
okay.
Jay can put them on the screen if she wants to. As I talk about them, there's some messages from Brandy Price on Facebook, and then Wazy shares some comments from somebody who could not comment. And I'll just take it on. So Brandy Price obviously is somebody who gotta put my glasses back on because I can't see. Hold on. Um, Jay, you want to put that on the screen? The abuse that Black femme people face by Black masked people you can find at the intersection of patriarchy and capitalism. And then they say, for a long time, Black femmes have to go through Black mask to have access to get financial resources. It's a comment mostly, right? So, patriarchy. I I think that's the thing. Like I know about intersectionality and intersectionalityism, right? Like maybe the fact that I said it like that, y'all might think she don't know nothing. Um, but yeah, I know that there's intersection oppressions, and that's like a intersectional feminism that kind of explores what all of those things are. And but for us, like intersectional feminism is just talking about colonialism. Like it's not patriarchy and colonialism. It's not capitalism and colonialism. It's colonialism. And everything that comes out of that is patriarchy, capitalism, all of that are the things that colonialism has created or deepened in the lives of our people. So for us, it's not an intersection. The intersection part of it to me is really and the way I also find it framed is that we got to do something about this system, as opposed to really directly understanding that the colonial question is the question that's center point. Like you can't do nothing about this system if all you're trying to do is destroy patriarchy and the intersection it has with racism. Because what is racism in and of itself? Like the racism is really is just trying to get white people to like you. Is racism is trying to is the ideological underpinning of every single thing, the basis for white people to make us feel or put these characterizations out there that African people ain't nothing. So when we talk about ending racism, and we don't really quite know when that will happen, because that would mean that all white people would just stop hating Black people, and we never know when that happens. The colonial question is the center part, right? Like at the point that we and destroy colonialism and get access to our resources and take power and be able to do something about all the things that people have been doing to us and continue to have done and continue to do to us, then we know that we've made an inroad. So the abuse of Black femme people faced by Black mass people you can find at the intersection of patriarchy. I know that there are abuses that, and I think that we covered that in this piece. We know that there is abuses that happen within the colony, and that these abuses are part of the whole colonial question. Like it's all the colonial reality the African people experience. So it's not just this thing between mask and femme. It is, even though that's an issue, but it's the whole reality of oppressor versus oppressed, right? Nation. And that within the colony, and that you have a colonized African masculine person oppressing an African colonized, femme person, that, you know, that even if we resolve all of it, if we just one day woke up and nobody was oppressing each other within the colony, we still are oppressed overall. So the thing that encourages this side of violence, this kind of dichotomy that exists between African people, is the society in which we live itself. Colonialism is this society, right? So this is a thing that we are struggling for. And when we talk about how we get rid of all these things, it's not by getting voted into the U.S. government and introducing a policy that makes sure that Black women aren't getting, eating peanut butter off of a carrot. If you listen to earlier what I said, and you get the reference, right? Um, but that's not the mark of progress, because you're integrating within the system that's oppressing those people. And the more African people that you think that you're going to get into the system, then you think that somehow, because this is a Black women are improving because we're able to do this and that. And the reality is that that's not true. We have whole entire African countries, African people don't have power. You know what I'm saying? African women still getting oppressed. And that's not because African men are doing that. It is the colonizers, the people who have always been oppressing us, that have created the conditions for which these very real issues manifest. We can't solve these problems. I mean, we can try. We are trying. We are doing things within our community to engage in discussions similar to what we're doing right now. But um, but the goal is to then get to the point where we can actually agree to destroy the colonialism. We want to resolve all these problems within our people, destroy colonialism. Um, and once you destroy colonialism, which means that we now have control of our own resources, that we can now create any kind of program we can for African women, and these things are going to solve the problem for African women and children, and we can address really this question of high violence, human trafficking, all of the things. This is my world. This is my freedom, right? Like all of these things, we would be in the process of healing society and trying to solve these problems. So I'm very aware that there are oppressive relationships within the colony. I'm very aware that there are people who identify intersections between racism, class, and gender. And African internationalism is what we understand to be a theory that basically explains the world, and we can find within that theory the ways in which we are impacted as African women and femmes. So that wasn't the question, that was a comment. So I was just in the comments. So I don't know if they um yeah, so they weren't asking me to explain anything to them, but I just decided to explain because I thought that it was a comment that should be addressed. Um, Another stream of comments came from Comment Wazy, who shared some comments from I don't know where, and I don't know who the person is that made these comments. She says, "I am Huru. I am watching with others, and a question comment was posed for Q&A. I'm watching, but can't comment. The points on feminism." She's sharing the person's comment. "The points on feminism, I think, completely disregard intersectional Black feminists." It then continues, on more than just equal pay across the gender gap, but take an intersectional approach um, to addressing both gender oppressionism. I think that's the way, gender oppressionism. Then goes on to say, and racial oppression in conjunction with colonialism and capitalism. So I think that's kind of an important thing to know, this person says. And then they go on to say, if we are going to group feminists that are actually Black feminists whose focus is very intersectional, very transitional, and very aware of multiple oppressions and colonialism. And then that's the end of it, I think. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jay. So I'll just repeat what I just said. Intersectionality for us is just a very varied way of saying colonialism without saying colonialism. People say colonialism like, I don't know, like the way I've experienced people talking about colonialism who are not like in a party, it's like a thing. It's like a thing you could pick up at the supermarket and kind of like put down. Like it's not something that we really, I don't feel that people really internalize. They might say, I'm decolonizing, as if it's like something that you aren't confronted by every single day. So when we talk about the ways in which patriarchy manifests itself in society right now, capitalism is only in existence because colonialism made way for it. Like there would be no worldwide system of capitalism had it not been for the violence that comes with colonialism, the actions that comes with colonialism. All of those things um, made way for all the intersections that people are raising in terms of racism, um, capitalism, patriarchy. And I'm not saying that just to disregard, what people are raising in terms of like, I'm not disregarding like like these people who are really digging deep and trying to really understand what all these things are. But I also observe that even when you're talking about intersectionalism, there's not really a way out. There's not really like, how do we free ourselves from this thing? It's like, let's just deal with, like, we have to talk about the intersection of race and privilege and class and all of these things. But like, what is like, there's no solution to how we destroy the barriers that impact us in all those different in those areas which are a result of colonialism. So I don't want to discount, black women or black people who identify as intersectional black feminists, but I also see that there are flaws. And this discussion that we just read from an article is just one person. I don't know what type of feminist they are, and that's also another issue, is that you never know what kind of feminist you're speaking to. Um, and I'm not trying to group all feminists together because, like I said before, like I know that there are all kinds of feminists that represent themselves in different ways, and they talk about intersectional, and there's radical, there's all these other kinds of things. But for us, that really just muddies the water to the ultimate question: and to what end are we fighting? Like, and is it this struggle between men having power over us, or is it a struggle between like the power in and of itself? And what are we doing within the colony right now to deal with those those internal colonial contradictions that are very, very present? And how are we hoping to resolve that so that we can actually overturn the relationship that we have with the antagonistic oppressor, which is the state, the colonial and capitalist imperialism that is right here in front of our face? So I appreciate the comment. And I know that this is probably going to cause more discussion. And I think that's what we want in this program, is to have discussion. Let's talk all the way through it. Because at the end of the day, my question is, how do we get free, y'all? And if you think that black men or colonized men are the thing that's preventing us to get free, then maybe the discussion ends there. But that's just not it. It's just not it. Coco, I saw you popped up on the screen. Was there something that I didn't see?
No, because with in the article it says like if we solve all the things that all the entire feminist platform, even intersectional feminine, feminists, or black feminists or hood feminists, even if we solve that, it still won't. We still won't be free,
Mm-hmm.
because we are still the mothers of black males. We're the mothers of the binaries. We're the mothers of all of these, and it doesn't matter if you're male, female, but non-binary. You are oppressed underneath this, underneath colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just want to toss that in.
Yeah, and we are African National Women's Organization, so we always talk about like the special oppression of African women. So we understand that there are sectors of our community that experience a special oppression. So, for example, Camera Coco just raised up like trans, but non-binary folks who don't really subscribe to the gender construct that the society puts on us. And so we recognize there are struggles that need to happen in those spaces, and should and are happening in those spaces, that are really helping society understand that y'all, we just human beings, and we African human beings who, despite the fact that we may be making progress in all these different sectors, still ain't free, y'all. just it's just the question of it. Like, yeah, we got some internet, but there are, African people, the majority of us live on the African continent, right? Or in Brazil, because that's where the second largest population of African people live. Do you know the conditions of African people throughout the African continent? Like, it's not homogeneous. Like, people are struggling. Like, we don't have access to anything. This is the struggle that's happening in Niger right now, where African people are like, F France, get out of my face. You know, Chairman did a whole, that's Secretary General Louisi did a whole thing, Tafari did a whole thing about this whole struggle and like what it really means. I suggest y'all look back at that. But I'm raising that because there is a real struggle that is happening for African people that to get free of the colonizer, direct colonialism and indirect colonialism through neo-colonialism. And so African people, because we don't have roads, y'all. In certain parts of the United States, there's not roads in certain parts where African people are. Ain't no light, ain't no running water, ain't none of that. You know, this is a reality. Not because we don't work hard or we don't deserve it or anything like that. It's because there is a system put in place that was created and brought up to prevent us from getting all these things to make our life easy enough so that we can say, listen, you know, sit back in the porch and twiddle on our little straw hay and be like, I got this water now, but let me start thinking about how I can get all the water, right? Like, you know, we can't even think about that. We just trying to do a well in the backyard and try to pump water out the ground, as opposed to saying that we are the what's the word I want to say? We are the not the curators, but we are the responsible for this earth that we have around us. And you know, if the water that was put here by whatever nature is now going all the way to France to power France, certain parts of France, but ain't got no power right next to the place where the water is, that is a problem. And so this is a colonial question that's really doesn't, you know, there's no way to discuss this within the construct of patriarchy. Like, we have to discuss it within the colonial, because then this question of water then brings about other questions and other concerns in reality. How do you get water to African women, particularly when they're on their menses? I mean, how do you get cleanliness and things that help you clean yourself? And how do you power your house to make things easy? Like, then all of these things that are happening because of colonialism impact the lives of African women directly. How do you, you know, there was a thing where African women now, at the onset of some places in Africa that was, you know, we were attacked, African people were stolen, but then it was the onset of colonial institutions, right? Like, they put their cities down, they hired Negroes to work in their offices, and African women were still the ones in the fields collecting food, but also working in the houses of white women, right? Like, so they had to go work in the houses of white women, come home, work there, and then take care of the kids because the man was now doing something else or felt free enough to go do something else. And we're saying that's all BS. Our responsibility is to right the wrongs of what colonialism has done to our community and to our world. And if somebody wants freedom from all of that, we hear you. We down with that. But our explanation for why this is happening to us is not intersectional feminism. It's not patriarchy. It's cut and clean colonialism. And that's the way we explain the conditions of African women and all the things that people are raising in chat about why it is that Black women need to do whatever to get free. But outside of really dealing with colonialism and really having an analysis that really centers colonialism, not makes it an add-on to all of the isms, but the fact that it is the thing that creates all the other isms is the thing that what we're saying in this broadcast. Let me see. Let me see if there's any there. Is there anything else? How does colonialism make? Okay. I'm going to star a few more. I know that we have only a few minutes left in this program, so I'm going to try to get the last few. And Coco, if you see anything, just star it in the chats, and then I'll see if I can take it. But I started one, Jay, and this person says it's from Ohio. How does colorism relate to this topic, and how it has been weaponized by the movement to divide African people? How does it relate to this topic? You know, all things flow from colonialism. Colonialism doesn't care, you know, and that also is part of like the history of class distinction within the African community everywhere, right? Like the whiter, the brighter you are, the more closer that you can be to white people, and the more elite you may feel, or you feel like you have the responsibility of. There's plenty of stories, I think, across the board, everywhere that you land and you see colonialism, that you see these questions of like light skin and versus dark skin, or these sort of arguments around privilege in that area. Listen, y'all, we wouldn't be having these discussions if it wasn't for colonialism. Just, I mean, I'm going to sound like a broken record. We wouldn't have these kind of discussions if it were not for colonialism. It put it there. It put it right in the center for us to have these discussions or issues. And the reason why we don't like light skinned Becky is because light skinned Becky may feel like, they are trying to be like, white man Jack. You know what I'm saying? Or the reason why light skinned Becky, um, or the reason why you don't like dark skinned Jane is because you feel like dark skinned Jane represents the part of yourself that you want to erase. And that's not a cut and clean, example or explanation about why people feel certain ways, but like really these questions around light skin, dark skin, colorism, all of these things are put there to also keep us distracted. Because when you're trying to resolve why light skin Becky don't like dark skin Jane, like we not talking like that's in the grand scheme of things. It's just like I work with light skin Becky every day in the movement to free our people. Like if that's the center point for which we can organize with one another and like get with one another, then we can, then this question around colorism doesn't even make it into the discussion. Like it just don't. Like, when you are focused on this goal of trying to get free, then, the question of colorism doesn't get so it does make it into the topic in terms of that it relates to colonialism, but in terms of it's a product of colonialism, but but all the things that we discussed today is a product of colonialism that really distracts us from making the ultimate struggle, which is to free ourselves from this thing. um and there are no other pins for right now, so I'm
Is
going to
one just came up here. You see the last comment
I don't.
from
Okay.
Kumba Chinia.
Okay, I see. All right. So the Who President yesterday, you spoke to forms of feminism. What are some forms of that? Is one dialectically different from the other? Well, I mean, dialectically, no. I mean, there may be like so there are there are different iterations of feminism from what I understand, because one kind of feminism doesn't really address the thing, and so there's an introduction of other things to kind of deepen the feminist analysis. So it might be, you know, um, I'm a intersectional feminist to kind of deal with the questions of race, class, gender, and all of these other kind of things. And then it's like radical Black feminism, which basically might be in the verb of like revolutionaries, maybe. Then there may be some. I don't know all of them, but I do know that there are different iterations of it, and partially that is the question. They're created because feminism by and solely by itself does not address any of the things that colonized people are facing. So you have to join it on to something else. And so dialectically there may be a difference in terms of like the additional things that people work on. But I think fundamentally, unless they're talking about like real like overturning colonialism, like then it gets us to the same conclusion of we just trying to struggle so that we can fit into the status quo or make the status quo something that is more palatable to us, without destroying the overarching colonial system. So, yeah, I appreciate that question. So that is the last question. I do want to keep us on time. Comrade Jay got to go, but I appreciate everybody in the discussion. And listen, we might have this one again. And I thank y'all so much. Uhuru, we are winning. African women must be free. African women are taking the lead. And we will see you next month for our next round of political educations. Uhuru.
Uhuru.